Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the new album from Ty Segall, titled Manipulator. Occasionally, you see people working in the music industry who generate an insane amount of music. They got work ethics like nobody else. They drop albums every year. They write, perform, and even collaborate and seem to do it all. And it's even rare, though, to find acts that can maintain some vestige of consistent quality along the way, because, let's be honest here, if you continue churning out material, album after album, eventually, you're gonna slip up. And for some critics, it becomes something of a waiting game, eager if you're not a fan, or nervous if you are. And if you're a fan of lo-fi indie garage rock, the name that leaps to the top of your list would be Ty Segall. Originating from San Francisco, he managed to drop a frankly astounding number of records, collaborations, and projects since 2005. And the amazing fact is that the majority of those albums are pretty damn solid, be them on his own, with his band, or with Fuzz, Mikhail Cronin, or White Fence. And that's not counting the truly excellent albums he has released, the most notable being the noisy and aggressive Slaughterhouse with the Ty Segall Band back in 2012. Now, in recent years, some of the darker edges of the 60s blues and psychedelic rock that have always influenced him have bled into his work, which coalesced most on 2013's Sleeper, a more acoustic leading album that showed a fair amount of consistency but didn't always click for me. Now, that's more because the quieter focus meant a lot more emphasis on the lyrics, which have probably been my one consistent hang-up with Ty Segall. Now, he's not a bad lyricist by any stretch, but a lot of his songwriting has fallen into this brand of simple and yet aggressive self-deprecation that can occasionally lack nuance. And that can work when you're playing fuzz-saturated ruckus guitars and is howling into the microphone. Not everyone's trying to be perfect pussy after all, but a more acoustic ambiance naturally draws more focus to the songwriting, and in that case, Ty Segall can occasionally fall short. Now, that being said, a lot of his music has steadily become a lot more polished with every single release, and with early reviews suggesting that his newest album, Manipulator, was his most lush, expansive, and his longest to date, I'll admit I was not sure what to expect, but I went in and listened to it a couple times anyway. What'd I get? Well, I pretty got mostly what I would expect from Ty Segall, which is a pretty solid album with a few standout hits, a couple duds, and a sign that his greatest strength might just be the fact that he's so damn consistent in putting out quality songs and albums. What I really do like about this album is that the thematic cohesion finally is able to match the instrumental cohesion, and blending all of Ty Segall's numerous influences together. But at the same time, it produced a certain uniformity in the sound and quality that might be a little bit to surpass and rise above it. So, okay, to explain that, let's start with Ty Segall himself. Now, okay, I'll go on record saying that I like his more rough-edged, howling lower range than his upper range in his falsetto, but he does manage to make that upper range work more often than not on this album. Now, the key thing with Ty Segall is very much analogous to what Jack White's most recent work, in that he knows how to frame himself properly through his vocal delivery, and his lower range tends to be a lot more expressive in conveying the sleazy, lecherous, craven, darker side of his persona, which becomes a natural fit for a lot of the subject matter. We'll come back to that. With much of his falsetto, however, I found myself drawing more comparisons to many of the vocalists of the first British invasion in the late 60s and early 70s, and it doesn't always feel as distinctly cohesive with the subject matter, especially on the more stripped-back, psychedelic, folk-inspired numbers. And on songs like The Singer, I'm reminded a fair bit of when Billy Joe Armstrong of Green Day or Matt Bellamy of Muse tried to call back to that era of rock music with significantly more earnestness, and I gotta admit, it doesn't always click for Ty Segall. Now, thankfully, the instrumentation does make up for a lot of that, and like always, a lot of Ty Segall's strengths really do shine through here in making really catchy rock music. Now, I always prefer him on the rougher side of garage rock, and thus bass-heavy tracks like the noise rock song It's Over, and this near mirror track with the explosive The Crawler, and then you have Susie Thumb, the last featuring some great punchy drum work and production there. These are the tracks that really did work for me. But there was also the ominous chug of Feel, the great acoustic lo-fi balance on the hand and the feels, or groove-driven songs like The Faker, the fantastically memorable melodic riff on The Clock. But you know what, to my surprise, the integration of strings or more opulent elements, they sound workable here too, like on the opening track Manipulator or on The Clock, mostly thanks to Ty Segall's very smart production choice to segregate the lo-fi segments from those that sound cleaner while still preserving a lot of the texture, especially in the heavy acoustic strumming that punctuates every song that of course I really like. Now that said, there are definitely a couple instrumental and production elements that misfire on this album. Connection Man features this really high grating synth tone that cuts through even the guitar snarl. It was exceptionally annoying. The guitar line on Mr. Main barely evolved, and combined with the multi-track falsetto and the beat switch up and solo that went nowhere, it just did not work for me whatsoever. And while I did like the string section on the singer, that solo and the guitar just fizzled out completely. I'm sorry. What this does become apparent over the course of this album instrumentally is that certain songs do start to run together a little bit, or show some distressing similarities to previous songs on the album. And sure, while the longer, more grandiose tone fits some of the instrumentation, it does mean that this album has a little bit of dead weight in terms of some filler songs, and they could have used some real tighter grooves or a quicker tempo to really pick up the pace. And now we come to lyrics and themes. And look, after going through all of Ty Segall's works, there's a limit to how much one can really expect in terms of thematic cohesion. And thus I was pleasantly surprised to see him pull together a broad selection of situations tied around the theme of manipulation, and a fair number of interesting stories too. And it definitely helps matters that Ty Segall isn't afraid to frame himself as a less sympathetic character, almost craven and lecherous, especially as his voice drops from its upper range into its more sinister lower range. And when this album sticks to exploring some of these themes and stories, it can pull together some really strong songs that I like. It's all passive aggression and contempt as he toys with emotional distance. Feel plays on some psychological terror. The Faker drops into a conventionally despicable Iago or Frank Underwood role, speaking to the audience and not his prey. And Mr. Main is all about cronyism. But sometimes Ty Segall goes for more abstract situations, like on The Clock, where he talks about how people allow themselves to get manipulated by their perception of time, or the artist exploiting a girl for artistic inspiration on Green Belly, or people allowing themselves to be exploited by technology on songs like Common Man, or by the slightest desire to have the slightest bit of human contact on the hand. Now, it's in the second half of this album where the distrust of really relying on technology that has come up multiple times before in Ty Segall's lyrics fuses with his more personal framing, and we get the one named character of the album on the titular track, Susie Thumb, a girl addicted to her phone and the slightest hope for that 15 minutes of fame that might come from the right Instagram retweet. And it's very telling that in the very next song, Ty Segall begins plying for her affections by playing on her insecurities, which he then remorselessly gloats about on The Crawler, which thematically operates as a pretty effective reprise of It's Over and that same corruption in his character. But then the tables are very harshly turned on the feels. It's revealed that both Ty Segall and Susie have been manipulating each other all along. And it's not only now that they both realize her manipulations, her realizing for himself and Ty Segall realizing he's been manipulated. Because while she might not have realized it, she's really only just like him. It's a really sobering moment on this album, especially in Ty Segall's resignation of the whole affair, almost as if he expected it. He knows that he's manipulating people, and maybe, at least to his point of view, that's the only way people can really communicate in today's day and age. It's very noteworthy that there are many tracks showing people looking for that human connection, and yet when they find it, they choose to screw with each other. And then comes the final, very potent statement in Stick Around, almost very subtle, where Ty Segall looks straight into the camera and says, "It's love," at least by his definition, and that we as an audience still want to stick around and see it, because it's better to have those human connections, even if forged under manipulative pretenses, than to have no connections at all. It's really a dark, nihilistic point of view, implying that the only way that human beings have relationships in the modern era is through manipulation. But by framing himself as easily the worst culprit and manipulator, Ty Segall really humanizes the record in everything that he does, and presents the audience with the uncomfortable truth that even if we don't want to admit it, we're a lot like him. And at the very least, we're going to be sitting back and watching the whole story unfolding and enjoying it. We might not be Machiavelli, but on some level, we're drawn to these stories. And even despite framing himself in real darkness, we're still going to listen to Ty Segall. And on some level, we're gonna root for him as well. So in the end, I really did surprisingly like Manipulator by Ty Segall, even though I don't quite love it. It's got a lot of lyrical nuance, fearlessly tricky framing, and a lot of instrumental cohesion I really appreciate it. Say nothing of some truly great textured songs, but ultimately it runs a little long and it's ultimately a little bit too scattershot to work all the way through. In other words, I think a very strong 7 out of 10 is appropriate, as well as a recommendation to all fans of Ty Segall or anyone who's had a craving for some solid, rough-edged, guitar-driven garage rock. But what I really do appreciate about this album is the fact that Ty Segall has finally shown some real ambition behind this record in terms of making real album statements with presence and power. And on that note, Manipulator shows a lot of promise for the future. So go check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. If there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.